Thaddeus McCotter, my colleague and co-host. We're joined by Gordon Chang of Forbes.com, publishing most recently in the Daily Beast, asking questions about the Iran suspect secret nuclear weapons program negotiation in Switzerland. We're watching and waiting for new information. Last reported is that the negotiators are stalled over several critical points. However, Mr. Chang is seeking information about something that I have not seen brought up at the table. They're dealing with the nuclear fuel cycle, what is to be done with the enriched material, what about the sanctions, what about inspections. No mention of North Korea. Gordon, what about North Korea and Iran? What don't we know? Good evening to you.
Good evening, John and Thaddeus. What's important here is that the Iranians and the North Koreans have been running for probably about a decade a joint nuclear weapons program. We know that the Iranians have established a military base with North Korea just south of the Chinese border, and so clearly there's a lot going on. Every time the North Koreans have detonated a device, which is 3 times now, there have been Iranians on site in North Korea to observe and participate. We know the North Koreans have sold the Iranians enriched uranium, perhaps of weapons grade. And there's a lot of technology sharing and cooperation with North Koreans in Iran. So this is a bad situation, especially because it's not just Iran, it's also Syria. That nuclear reactor that the Israelis destroyed September 2007, that's a North Korean design. And those Israeli planes killed North Korean technicians on the ground.
Thaddeus?
Yes, Gordon, I'm glad you brought up Syria. There is a mutual defense pact between Iran and Syria, kind of our generation's version of Molotov-Ribbentrop. And should this continue with North Korea and Iran, I think you hit it on the head. There's a very good chance that intelligence is currently being shared with the Syrians. Is that not correct?
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of sharing between the North Koreans and the Syrians. Those chemical weapons that the Syrians used about 18 months ago and about a couple months ago, those are probably North Koreans. There are unconfirmed reports of North Koreans actually assisting the Syrians in using those chemical weapons. So there is a vast multinational effort here on weapons of mass destruction involving, among others, Iran, Syria, North Korea.
Gordon and Thaddeus, I present to you a case that I've had put to me by someone in seeking to defend the Obama administration's negotiations, protracted and non-transparent negotiations with Iran over its suspect secret nuclear weapons program. It goes like this. Over the last 70 years, since the end of the war, since the U.S. had the bomb and Russia sought it, and then the proliferation chain and eventually the non-proliferation treaty at the United Nations, there are a handful of nations that have been threatening and then went rogue and developed a bomb on their own. Pakistan, certainly, and India to match it. North Korea is now, because of its test, considered a nuclear nation. And we could throw China in there that stole or was given the weapon by Russia many years ago. The observation is this, that beforehand, these predator states, these rogue states, are unpredictable and act frightened all the time, which makes them exceedingly dangerous to their neighbors. After they achieve the weapon, however, after they have the nuclear crown, they've become more stable, more predictable, less damaging to the region, and though they're a blot on the globe, they're not considered a threat the way they were before they had nukes. How do you respond, Thaddeus?
Well, I don't recall any of those nations saying death to America, number one. Number two, I think that comparing India to North Korea is ridiculous and insulting to the Indian government, which comes from the same colonial tradition as the United States. You had Pakistan and India, which were at each other's throats, but were not threatening their other neighbors, or certainly not threatening the United States. And I think this is very much a ridiculous argument to be made for allowing people that control a terrorist state that want to have death to the United States, that want to wipe Israel off the map. It seems to me that this is the ultimate rationalization, and only the kind of thinking that can come out of a bureaucrat in Washington can risk the lives of America and her allies. I think, John, you have much more patience for this sort of thing than I would.
I do have patience for it. I enjoyed it. All right, Gordon, there you have it. The State Department rationale, and State Department will include the NSC in this, you understand, Gordon, for why Iran getting the bomb will become more predictable and a better member of the community of nations.
I think the important thing here is that when North Korea and when China got the bomb, it gave it to Pakistan. Pakistan then sent the technology to, among other countries, Iran. North Korea has actively proliferated nuclear weapons technology. And Iran, who are Iran's friends? Well, I can think of two right off the top of my head, Hamas and Hezbollah. And so, who knows what Iran will do once it gets the bomb, but nonetheless, I don't think that that's something that we want to face, because if Iran does give Hamas, for instance, the bomb and it detonated in Israel, the world is just so completely different after that. We're talking about not only just thousands of lives, 3,000 lives on 9/11, that's nothing compared to what can happen if Iran gets the bomb.
Therefore, we're looking at the edge of darkness, Thaddeus? Is that where we are? Because once we're out of the region, there is no cop on the beat, and we already have a hint from Saudi Arabia that it'll go nuke, or at least it will no longer rule that out. So everyone will want the bomb.
Don't you find it ironic, John Gordon, that a president who in his college years was actively involved in the nuke freeze movement now seems to have no compunction with rogue states getting nuclear bombs because it'll make the world more stable?
All right, Gordon, North Korea, there's nothing we can do about it. There's nothing we can do about Iran continuing to test its weaponization, miniaturization, and weaponization of a weapon, correct? And China must want it that way, Gordon. It's the largest protector of North Korea.
Well, there's a lot we can do, John. It's just that we don't have the will to do it. So, for instance, we could have much stricter sanctions. We could actually have an embargo. We could tell our allies that Iran is our number one foreign policy objective, and if you cross it, we will cross you. It's just a question of how important this is. Some people may think that Iran getting the bomb is not important. I think it's actually quite a big risk, and so I would go to great lengths to actually make sure Iran doesn't get the bomb. And you don't have to go to war to do it. You can just apply sanctions, not only on Iran, but also countries that do business with Iran. This is really important, and I know that none of the solutions are good, but just imagine what happens when, these ayatollahs get the weapon and they give it to some sort of terrorist group, which they're perfectly capable of doing.
Gordon Chang of Forbes.com, Thaddeus McCotter, WJR, the great voice of the Great Lakes. I'm John Batchelor.